Good morning, everyone. You're watching Moms Matter. I'm your host, Rin Yagar, and today is probably one of the most special days in the studio today, all the way from Eva. We have one of the most influential Jewish men alive. His name is Hillel Noyer. He is the executive director of UN Watch, and he has been advocating for human rights and holding the United Nations accountable in the darkest of times. Hillel, wow, you're here in the flesh. We are all following you. We're so grateful to you. Thank you for all the great work you're doing.
Thank you. Great to be here. You know, we've been active the past year when the Women, Life, Freedom revolution began in Iran. We took the lead at the United Nations in fighting for the women of Iran, for the people of Iran. And I have so many followers here in Los Angeles and California from the Iranian community. So for me, it's really great to be here and be among people who really know what we're doing and understand it.
I mean, you've really dedicated your entire life to standing up to evil, to hold the United Nations accountable. And as we know, the Islamic regime is probably the deadliest and worst regime out there, and you've been fighting them. But it kind of falls on deaf ears many times. I see all the times that you've spoken to the United Nations. How do you handle representing UN Watch while the United Nations Council is so corrupt?
Yeah, look, it's there is this horrible contrast. I'm based in Geneva, which is beautiful. You know, when you walk outside of the UN room, you see the Mont Blanc, the Swiss Alps, the Lake of Geneva. It's magnificent. But inside the room, there's so many terrible things happen at the United Nations Human Rights Council, which you'd think would be equally beautiful and idealistic and reflect the setting that we're in, but it's not. As you mentioned, Iran just several months ago was made chair of the UN Human Rights Council Social Forum. You know, how disgusting a regime that beats, blinds, poison, tortures women and girls is elevated to this position, named by the president of the Human Rights Council. America objected. They were the only ones. We got a number of European parliamentarians, but no country, France, Germany, Sweden, Canada, didn't say a thing. And that's what we see time and again at the United Nations is some of the worst dictatorships seem to have all the passion, all the intensity, and the democracies once in a while speak out, but are weak and cowardly. And, you know, we saw in history what happens when horrible dictatorships who kind of tell you what they're going to do. You know, Adolf Hitler in the 1930s in Germany, he basically told the world his evil plan, and people found ways to appease him and to convince themselves that he wasn't so dangerous. And the Iranian regime, if we see what they say, if we see what they do, they, along with their puppets in Syria, Hezbollah and others, and their allies, the North Koreans, Putin in Moscow, the Cuban communist regime, the Venezuelans, they're all working together. And my friend Masih Alinejad, she says, the evil dictatorships are working together. What about us? It's time for the democracies to work together. The United States, France, Britain, Canada, Australia, and they're not. Too often they are silent. And if you don't have moral backbone, if you don't have courage, the bad guys are fighting and they're not giving up. So we need to fight back. That's our message.
So I hear that. I mean, it's moral bankruptcy all the way through, time and time again. But you have the courage and you're standing up, but you can't do this alone. So how can we help rally the Western world to stand up against this? It's pure evil. I mean, why is it so difficult? I just don't get it.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. You know, when I'm sitting there at the UN, at the Human Rights Council, China, the communist regime of Beijing, which has 1.5 billion people subjugated, no freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly. You know, Dr. Wenli Yang tried to sound the warning of the coronavirus. They summoned him, they shut him up, they put people in prison, they lock up 1 million Muslims and put them in concentration camps. And no one says a thing. You know, none of the Muslim countries at the UN, there's so many Muslim countries, Qatar, Pakistan, Libya, they're all sitting there. They don't say a thing about what China is doing to their fellow Muslims. We take the lead. We've been bringing Uyghurs for more than a decade, every single year, the leading Uyghur activists, bringing them to speak out. People like Rabia Kandir, Dalsun Ika, and Nuri Turkel, bring them to the UN to confront their oppressors. And I would say, you know, even the democracies, they have business deals. So Ireland once signed a statement. They didn't even vote, but they joined a statement, a speech criticizing China. The next day, headlines in the Irish papers, China is going to cancel their order for Irish beef. And they're like, well, maybe we made the wrong decision. We shouldn't have spoken out. So that kind of a thing, economic pressure, forces, I wouldn't say it forces, but sadly, it pressures many countries to be silent. But the end is not good, because the more powerful they get more hungry for taking over. We saw Putin, when he saw that the West was weak, when we gave up on Afghanistan and other countries, he took over, large parts of Ukraine, and China's looking at Taiwan. So if we rally together and be strong, this is what we're going to face. So our message for our friends and supporters around the world to get their government. So if you're watching in America, in Canada, in Europe, get your representatives, get your Secretary of State, get your president to be aware that there are dictatorships out there. They're trying to take over the UN. We could say, who cares? It doesn't matter. But, thought is father to deed. The things that are said at the UN have enormous symbolic value. They have legitimacy, the appearance of legitimacy, whether it's right or wrong.
Yes.
They are translated in languages all around the world. So when they subvert human rights and corrupt the ideas of individual rights, saying that religions have rights, you can't defame religion. If you criticize radical Islam, then you're Islamophobic, and that becomes a law at the UN that you can't defame religions. And we find it filtering through into judgments in democracies, saying that you can't speak out against this, accusing activists. The ironic thing is that you have women's rights activists who are Iranian, who are accused of being Islamophobic, who come from Islamic families, but are criticizing the horrific, brutal, bloody oppression. And they're against oppression. They're not against a religion. And the UN is standing on the wrong side of this and is empowering people in this country like Ilhan Omar, people like Rashida Tlaib, people like AOC, who go along with this false idea that if you speak out against an evil regime, you're Islamophobic. So that's coming with the UN and the appeasers in this country. We need to push back.
That's right, and that's exactly what they've done. And we've created this dystopic, life that we're all living in, and it's very frightening. I mean, you talk a lot, and you've worked very hard to disarm UNRWA. Okay. For people who don't know what UNRWA is, can you give us just a little bit of background of why they were established and what they were meant to do? And as we know, and as you revealed on October 7th, they really are a terrorist organization. And what are you doing to get rid of them?
So look, in Geneva, next to my office is the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, the UN High Commission for Refugees. That's the group that's mandated around the world when millions of Syrian refugees or from Sudan or from Ukraine. They step in, they're not perfect, but they try to resettle refugees, sending them to Germany, Sweden, America, other countries. And over the years, they have resettled millions of refugees. UNRWA is a dedicated agency, UN Relief and Works Agency, only for Palestinians. There's no UNRWA for Ukraine, there's no UNRWA for Syria, there's no UNRWA for Sudan. Only the Palestinians have their own agency. It has more employees than the agency that's supposed to help the world's refugees. They have 30,000 employees.
Wow.
So it's absolutely ridiculous, but it's part of the skewed anti-Israel agenda. But what's worse is that their mandate is not to resettle. So if you're a Palestinian and you're living in Jordan or Lebanon or Syria, and you could easily have been resettled in that country. Indeed, in Jordan, 2 million of the Palestinians living there have Jordanian citizenship and passports. And yet, according to the UN, they're refugees, which doesn't exist anywhere in the world. It would be like saying that Barack Obama is a Kenyan refugee or that Biden is an Irish refugee. Their families, we were all refugees once. My family came in 1904 from escaping Russian oppression to Canada. I'm not a Russian refugee. We've been Canadian for over a century. But only the Palestinians are told, you're refugees and you're going to go back to Palestine. And they don't mean the West Bank and Gaza. They mean Israel. And so they teach them the right of return, that you have a right to go back. And we know what it means. It's not an innocent walking, strolling for right of return. October 7th is exactly how Palestinians envision their right of return: to murder Jews, and as they see it, take their homeland. So if you support a two-state solution, that Palestinians should be free to rule themselves in Gaza and the West Bank, UNRWA is the opposite. UNRWA tells Palestinian children growing up in Gaza, you could see videos. Is your home here in Gaza? They ask the kids. La. No, our home is not here. Our home is there in Israel, in Ashdod, in Haifa, in Tel Aviv, in Jaffa. And so naturally they grow up. And when cement that we pay for, America gave $1 billion to UNRWA last 3 years to give them cement to build homes, hospitals, and schools. They're not using it for that. They're using it to build hundreds of miles of terror tunnels to tunnel into Israel and to do what UNRWA told them, to exercise their right of return, to kill Israelis and retake their home, not to build Gaza. So, Gaza is actually beautiful. I've been there. It's right next to Tel Aviv. It's Tel Aviv, if you want it, Tel Aviv 2.0. Beautiful white sands, magnificent, cliffs of sands. You can make it into Singapore. You can make it into Nice, like the French Riviera. They got billions of dollars from our tax money. Yeah. But they were told this is not your home and your mandate is to fight a jihad against Israel. So they took all the money and they didn't build up like Dubai. Dubai is an Arab country that is forward-looking, that wants to make peace. That's where we all should be going in the Middle East. But they're doing the opposite. They build down into terror tunnels, down into resentment, grievance, hatred, and war. And we're paying for it.
Unbelievable. It's just unbelievable. These are real facts. This is not just some, idea you have in your mind. And you have talked about this and you've presented the UN. But it's falling on deaf ears. Are they not doing anything about it? I mean, we now know that UNRWA actually was a part of the October 7th massacre. There were workers that were a part, that were killed, Israeli innocent people. And yet the UN Council is quiet. They don't want to do anything about it. They don't want to get rid of UNRWA.
Well, that's right. The so-called aid workers, we know 14 to 45 of them took part in the atrocities. One of them kidnapped the lifeless body of Yonatan Samarano, a 21-year-old boy. His mom came and spoke for us at a summit we had in Geneva a little over a month ago. And you see the video of an UNRWA social worker, an aid worker, kidnapping the lifeless body, putting him in an SUV and taking him into Gaza. We still don't have his body. And an UNRWA social worker took him. And, we've documented for the past decade how UNRWA staff, teachers and school principals, not once in a while, not a few bad apples, but systematically incite to slaughter Jews, call for jihad. People like Elham Mansour of Lebanon, a teacher who said, if you don't slaughter Jews, you're a bad Muslim. People like Su'el al-Hindi, who was principal of a boys' school in Gaza, head of the entire staff union in Gaza, was a elected member of the Hamas Politburo. It got so embarrassing that in 2011, UNRWA suspended him. All 8,000 UNRWA teachers, all 8,000, went on strike for months, shut down 240 schools, took 220,000 students out of school to rally in support of Hamas Politburo member Su'el al-Hindi. So when UNRWA tells us, and our governments, like the State Department, like the Canadian, Australian Foreign Ministry, the French, say it's a few bad apples. I was in Oslo, and they told me, Hillel, it's a few bad apples. No, it's not. It's 8,000, all of them rallying with the Hamas guy. And they don't want to hear it. It's so frustrating. And I know that people who are active on various human rights issues, I don't want to compare things always to the Holocaust, but I'm reading something recently, how in the 1940s, the Polish government in exile, there were Polish Jews who were in London, and they were telling people, we have testimony about what's happening. You've got to stop this. You've got to do something. And no one wanted to listen. And I feel that a lot with UNRWA. Thank God the US government, bipartisan legislation signed by President Biden, has banned funding for UNRWA for at least the next year. Till March 2025, the next administration will have to decide. Switzerland, where I live, has for now frozen funding. Britain, Netherlands, Germany, at least for UNRWA in Gaza, have frozen funding. But they're all saying we're waiting for this report. It's a fake review. It's not independent. That's going to be coming out on April 20th. So we're warning the world. All we can do is give them the information. If they nevertheless choose to fund an agency that is dedicated to perpetuating grievances, war and terrorism, I can't explain it. I can't explain it.
I mean, if you really care about the Palestinian people, you would get rid of UNRWA so that they can actually have all of the things that they should have.
Absolutely.
So thank you for the work you're doing, because if it weren't for you, Hillel, if it weren't for UN Watch, none of those assets would be frozen, and we wouldn't be moving towards finding a resolution for the Palestinian people, which is really what you're trying to do.
Absolutely. The Palestinians and Israelis could live in peace. We are cousins. Go try to find what an Israeli looks like and a Palestinian looks like. Most Israelis are from Middle Eastern countries. Good luck. You're not going to find it. So the whole thing that there's a racial bias is absurd. The Israelis and Palestinians are cousins. The languages are close. The religion share things in common when it's done in the right way, not the radical versions. Temperament-wise, there's a lot culturally that is shared. Most Jews come from Islamic Arab countries living in Israel. So really, as we see with the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Morocco, the Jews in Israel are thrilled to make peace in the Middle East and to be integrated. And if the Palestinians wish it, if they choose it, to build a Palestinian state instead of being dedicated to destroying a Jewish state, whatever its borders, we can have a better future, and that's what we're hoping for.
Yeah, and I know that that's what you do day in and day out. That's really what you're working towards. What would you say, Hillel, today in this moment, with all the work you've been doing this for 20 years, is really the pressing human rights issue of our lifetime in this moment that you're working against, that you really just want to see that you're working towards to get rid of? I mean, what is it? Is it UNRWA? Is it all the hate against Israel? What is it? Is it Iran? I mean, what would you pinpoint?
Well, we're fighting dictatorships and terrorists, sometimes terrorist regimes. On May 15th, we're going to have our 16th annual Geneva Summit for Human Rights, where we bring the most courageous champions of human rights from the worst dictatorships. People who've been in prison in Iran, Russia, Venezuela, Pakistan, Syria, North Korea, and many other countries. We bring them to testify from China. We bring Tibetans, Uyghurs, human rights lawyers who've been thrown in prison. Incredible people, some of them who were in prison, some of them are back in prison. Sadly, Vladimir Kara-Murza, the most courageous Russian dissident alive, and Navalny was just killed, as we know, in prison. And Vladimir Kara-Murza was poisoned twice, like Navalny. He went into a coma twice, and still he went back to Moscow, called out Putin's war crimes in Ukraine. He was on CNN. They arrested him an hour later, threw him in prison April 2 years ago, and sentenced him to 25 years in prison. Such a courageous person. We brought his wife to testify just a week ago. We brought Rosa Maria Paya from Cuba, her father, the leading Cuban dissident, Oswaldo Paya. He was killed in a mysterious car accident. Presumably the regime assassinated him. So our work is fighting dictatorships and fighting terrorists. It might be Hamas, it might be Hezbollah, it might be the terrorist regime that's funding them. The Iranian regime is, one of the leading terrorist sponsors in the world, certainly in the Middle East, taking over Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, Palestinian territories. It's unbelievable. There's no end to their appetite. Yeah. I know many Iranians cheered the fact that a leading IRGC commander was assassinated, which was coming to him because he's trying to spread war throughout the Middle East. And I saw Masih Alinejad shared a post of people in Iran drinking a toast that the IRGC was removed. He's a terrorist, not just against the neighbors, but against their own people. And they are working arm in arm with Russia, with Venezuela, with Nicaragua, with the Cubans. So it's an alliance of dictatorships and terrorists that we're fighting. It can be against Israel, it can be against Iranian people, it can be against Cuban people. And that's the alliance that we're against. That's the axis that we're fighting against.
I mean, are you not fearful for your life? Where do you find this courage?
We do take precautions, and we do have to be mindful that we're in a world where years ago, the dictatorships were a little bit distant. They were in Iran. But even then, in the 90s, Iran carried out a series of assassinations in European capitals. But other countries were a bit more moderate in their reach. Today, it's very different. Today, many of the regimes have all kinds of tools. They intimidate dissidents. And we saw that in London, a journalist who calls out the regime was just stabbed brutally, and his attackers escaped and flew out of the country, out of Heathrow Airport. We know here in America, friends of mine like Masih Alinejad, they tried to kidnap her and assassinate her several times, and also to assassinate leading American officials, former officials, whether it's John Bolton or Brian Hook. So we're mindful, we take precautions, but at the end of the day, I feel a need to speak out. And, as my namesake, I'm named after Hillel the Elder, in Hebrew, Hillel Hazaken. And one of his mantras was, if not now, when? And if not me, then who?
Wow, beautiful. So you're risking your life and you're doing the work, and we are here to support you. So I want you to look into that camera and tell us all what we can be doing to support the work you're doing, because we're not risking our lives every day. You are. And we want to make sure that your voice is heard. And in the end, you can bring peace, which is really what you're trying to do. So tell us what we all can be doing.
Look, first I want to thank our millions of supporters around the world who have made our testimonies go viral, those that we deliver and those that our courageous champions, dissidents, former political prisoners, that they deliver. You have liked them, you shared them, you signed our petitions, you've contributed money. All of those things empower us. When I go into the UN, and I face these awful dictatorships, they try to shut me down at the UN, and they've done it the past couple of years, kind of took me off the speakers list numerous times, cut me off, when I know that we have tens of thousands, in some cases millions of supporters around the world. It's the wind in our sails. So if you want to help, make sure you're following us, UN Watch, my own account, Hillel Noyer, whether it's on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok. Like our accounts, share our material, sign our petitions. Make sure to sign up. Sign up at unwatch.org. Give us your email. We'll bug you maybe once or twice a month with some newsletters, giving you the opportunity to make a difference and to join what is really a movement worldwide fighting for real human rights, real democracy at the United Nations. What happens there affects all of us. If we don't fight back, nobody else will. So thank you for your support. It means a lot.
Hillel, you're a hero. Thank you for all the great work you're doing. We are so lucky you're here in LA. Thank you for spreading truth and combating this misinformation. And what are you looking for to achieve in LA while you're here?
Well, just here to meet supporters and meeting also some kindred spirits, journalists and activists. And there's a lot of important people here who care about these issues. So I think we'll make some important networking.
And what about love? What about love, Hillel? Is there room for love in your life?
Well, you know, when you type in my name, Hillel Noyer, one of the first things that comes up on Google, it says Hillel Noyer wife and Hillel Noyer net worth. So some people are searching for that. The answer for both are no. I don't have either, but it's time to get both. So it's time to settle down.
All right, ladies. So Hillel Noyer is here in LA. He's single. So all the single ladies, he's here. Reach out to them, DM him. You might get a chance to grab a coffee with him. I'm not sure. But in all seriousness, you are a champion. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all the great work UN Watch does. And we'll see you all next time right here on Moms Matter.